Picture this. 480 Marines trapped in hostile terrain, their ammunition nearly gone, enemy muzzles flashing from every ridge. Command had already started drafting the casualty list. The handbook said to hold. The handbook said, stand down. But in that moment when waiting meant certain death, one overlooked sniper broke the script. This is the story of Sergeant Rachel Vega, the Marine they dismissed as dead weight, who drew her own line and brought an entire battalion home alive. Before we get into it, drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? I love seeing our military family scattered across the world. The Helmand sun burned white into the dust, seeping into every crease of gear and uniform. Inside the chow hall, laughter echoed off concrete, careless and sharp. It was the sound of Marines filling their plates and lungs before another patrol. But far from the clatter of trays and the banter of voices, one figure sat alone, cross-legged on a tarp with a rifle across her lap. Sergeant Rachel Vega, 27 years old, Marine Corps sniper, moved with the precision of a clock, every action deliberate, steady, and unhurried. Her frame was smaller than most around her, barely over 5 feet. Narrow shoulders under the tan blouse. Where the others radiated swagger, she radiated control. She ran a cloth through the bore, checked the bolt face, then jotted notes into a small spiral notebook balanced on her knee. Her M40A5 wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of her thoughts. She logged each adjustment like scripture, clicks on the scope, changes in humidity, wear on the muzzle. She knew exactly how her rifle would breathe on any given day. 2 lance corporals strolled by on their way to the barracks, smirking like a shove. There's the quota sniper, one muttered loud enough for her to catch. Paper shooter, the other added, laughing. Good thing cardboard doesn't shoot back. Neither slowed down. Neither expected her to reply. Rachel didn't. She polished the bolt and scribbled another line in her notebook. She'd heard it all before. Dead weight, mascot, check the box, sniper, too small, too quiet, too different. Even seasoned sergeants, men marked by 3 deployments, brushed her off with casual certainty. Vega's good for range scores, one had told the company commander. But combat sticker on radios, keep her useful. That's it. And so they did. She was kept on support duty, hauling gear, checking comms, running logistics sheets. No one asked her to climb ridges. No one asked her to peer through her scope in real fights. She was told politely to stay in her lane. What they never realized, because they never looked, was that Rachel Vega built her own training program in the silence of long nights. While others swapped jokes in the smoke pit, she spread maps under a red lens flashlight, memorizing terrain until it lived in her head. She charted wind shifts, noting every change at different times of day and in different valleys. She drilled trigger discipline with dry fires until her breathing was steady as a metronome, and in her little green notebook, the one that looked like a grocery list, she wrote it all. Ballistic tables, environmental offsets, calculations worked by hand in case technology failed. Each page filled with neat handwriting, rows of numbers, arrows across grids, her private doctrine, unseen by those convinced she had none. On her forearm, hidden under her sleeve, was a small tattoo, the Marine sniper emblem, a scoped rifle framed by laurel. She had earned it through sweat and precision, through a school that punished hesitation and demanded perfection. But here in Helmand, she tugged her sleeve low. No need to remind men already sure she didn't belong. That was the paradox of Rachel Vega. She never flared when mocked. She never argued when dismissed. She didn't throw words back to prove herself. She carried the insults like she carried her rifle, quietly, carefully, with patience. She was waiting not for permission, but for the inevitable moment when all her charts, numbers, and discipline would no longer be invisible. Her story didn't start in Helmand. It began in Redford, Arizona, where evenings smelled of dust and mesquite and the horizon stretched over flat farmland. Her father, a Marine who deployed twice before injuries forced him home, raised her with core discipline, even when the nearest base was hundreds of miles away. Chores at dawn, fences fixed before breakfast, and at dusk as the sky turned purple, he lined soda cans on fence posts and handed her a battered hunting rifle. Steady breath, he'd say, slow trigger. Let the shot surprise you. Chores came at dawn, fence repairs before breakfast, and by dusk, when the sky turned a deep purple, her father lined soda cans along fence posts and handed her a battered hunting rifle. Steady breath, he would remind her. Ease the trigger. Let the shot surprise you. By 12, she could knock every can down at 50 yards without hesitation. By 16, she outshot most of the men who came out to hunt. Her father rarely said much, but the quiet pride in his eyes told her everything. When he passed unexpectedly in her senior year, Rachel Vega enlisted in the Marines partly to honor him, but also to prove she could carry the discipline he had etched into her bones. She carried it well enough to earn a sniper billet, an achievement few women ever reached and fewer were recognized for. But in Helmand, paper credentials meant little against opinions that were already cemented. So she brought her rifle to the range and her notebooks back to the bunk, enduring whispers while others flaunted swagger. The compound itself was a bubble of routine. Patrols rolling out, reports coming in, Marines standing in chow lines, briefings repeating the same clipped lines. Rachel moved along the edges of it all, noticed but never valued. Then the orders came. 480 Marines with attachments were tasked to sweep a valley believed to be lightly defended. Intel painted it as a routine operation. Secure, clear, and stabilize. The map showed ridge lines and open ground, straightforward paths. Command sold it as simple. Rachel, sitting in the back of the briefing with her notebook balanced on her thigh, read the terrain differently. The contour lines screamed danger. Narrow approaches, high ground on 3 sides, kill zones ready to ignite. She raised her hand once, calm and steady. "Sir, have we considered this valley being a deliberate trap? These folds here," she pointed at the projected map. "They could conceal a strong enemy force. It looks too neat." Colonel Hayes, running the briefing, barely looked at her. "Sergeant, track equipment, not strategy. That's above your pay grade." Chuckles rippled through the room. "Dead weight talking tactics," one Marine muttered. Rachel closed her notebook and stayed silent. When the session ended, Marines slung rifles, adjusted helmets, and joked about how quick the sweep would be. From the edge of the room, Rachel watched them gear up, climb into transports, and roll toward the valley's mouth. 480 Marines moving by doctrine, carrying confidence untouched by doubt. She remained behind, assigned again to support duty. Her tasking was simple. Monitor comms, track supply movements, stay out of the operational lanes. It was all she'd been told, all she'd been conditioned to accept. But as the dust of departing vehicles drifted across the compound, and their silhouettes shrank into the horizon, Rachel felt the weight of every figure she'd logged in her notebooks. Every line she'd drawn across maps under midnight light. She had envisioned this valley long before the orders dropped. She had pictured exactly how it would close. And now, with 480 Marines driving into its jaws, she was left behind, sidelined. The next morning, the briefing room buzzed with the bravado of men convinced the map would obey. Rachel sat in her usual seat near the back, notebook steady on her thigh, pencil tucked behind her ear. Colonel Hayes dragged a red dot across the projected terrain. Ridges, routes, hold sites clean on the screen, brutal in reality. When he paused for questions, Rachel lifted her hand with the same steadiness she used behind a scope. "Sir, this valley is a trap," she said evenly. "These folds create intersecting fire. If they place machine guns on the spurs and RPG teams in the draw, our convoys will be pinned inside a bowl." He didn't follow her pointer. He just glanced at her name tape. "You're here to carry radios, not give strategy." Laughter stirred again. A private mind scribbling notes and winked at his buddy. Rachel's fingers tightened around the cardboard back of her notebook, then slowly released. The colonel clicked onward, and the red light erased her from the frame. On the range the next day, the wind quartered left to right just enough to make easy shots honest. Rachel lay prone, narrowed the world into reticle and heat, and dialed her dope. "Inhale, exhale." Steel rang, steady and indifferent. "Luck," a young private muttered when the 500 plate jumped. A gunnery sergeant spat into the dust. "Clay pigeons don't shoot back," he drawled, "and paper doesn't scream." She logged each shot by habit, distance, wind, hold, impact, and stripped the rifle to 0 without offering a defense. In the mess hall, trays squealed along the rails. Rachel Vega sat and 4 Marines across from her rose in unison, scraping their chairs as they moved to a distant table. "Babysitter with a rifle," one muttered, not bothering to hide it. She kept eating, jaw steady, spoon quiet against the bowl. Later, the only sound she allowed herself was the scratch of pencil on paper, darkening the contour lines where the valley pinched tight like a fist. During a base patrol near the motor pool, 2 SEALs strolled past with the relaxed symmetry of men who read each other by details. A few Marines from Rachel's company leaned near a Humvee, watching as she adjusted an antenna. "Dead weight," one announced as if delivering news. "Never seen a sniper scared to deploy." One SEAL's mouth tugged at the corner. Another exhaled a short chuckle. Rachel finished the radio check, logged the serial, and moved on. The insults had grown from whispers to lines to names meant to staple her place in the pecking order. Meanwhile, 480 Marines pushed toward the valley. For a time, the radios ticked with routine admin, position checks, fuel updates, route reports. Drone feed showed convoy dots moving along a dirt finger. Heat shimmer bending the image. Then the rhythm skipped. One report never came. Then two voices overlapped, frayed at the edges. Someone called for dismounts. Someone else cursed an engine that wasn't the issue. Then came the sound you hear once and never forget. The break in a man's voice when the world ahead of him erupts. Contact, contact, static swallowed the rest. Another net cut in. Taking fire. East Ridge. A third voice tried to report and collapsed into breath. The feed bloomed with heat signatures. Muzzle flashes stitched angry commas across the ridges. Smoke pulsed from the draw. Convoy dots compressed and froze. Conversation sank into murmurs. The watch officer lowered his headset and stared at nothing, as if willing the screen to change by sight alone. A lieutenant grabbed for a checklist, skimmed it, and found no line for what he saw. Chairs stopped scraping. The room recalibrated into a soundscape of breaths, clicking cursors and generator humican only by one phrase repeated like a shield. Hold position. Wait, follow protocol. Too hot, a major said, relieved to find the wording. No air support inside 200 miraculous, a captain repeated it louder as if volume turned it into action. Rules are clear. We hold outside the bubble. On a side monitor, a helmet cam showed dust crawling over grass, the horizon jerking with breath. Rounds chewed the dirt near boots. Bearings were shouted without conviction. Rachel edged closer to the back rail, eyes fixed on a drone angle that just caught the crown of a gun pit along the eastern spur. She counted bursts, mapped traverse in her head, read the wind in the way smoke bent. Colonel Hayes asked for options. The major quoted the manual. We need them to bound out of the ring, then we can bring steel. His tone made waiting sound like strategy. They can't bound, a captain admitted quietly. Then they hold, the major answered, clinging to the line. The earlier laughter had no citizenship here. Men who had smirked now busied their hands. Jokes died into silence. Rachel laid her palm against the canvas of her rifle case. The familiar drag of leather steadied her, not out of defiance but clarity. On the feed, the machine gun on the eastern spur began sweeping bursts down a gully where Marines clawed low to stay unseen. An RPG team in the draw shifted for a clean shot, knees digging into dirt. Too hot, the major repeated, clinging to the phrase. Nobody's asking for ordnance, Rachel Vega said at last. A rifle will do. Colonel Hayes turned slightly, not enough to count as attention. We are not authorizing anything that violates the 200-meter rule. It's not about authorization, she replied. It's geometry. Give me a position and time, and I'll cut their anchors without touching ours. A captain let out a laugh that cracked halfway through. You'll solve a battalion fight with a scope and an opinion, Sergeant. Stay in your lane. Took Jatsu from the doorway, the same lance corporal who loved the nickname tossed in his chorus. Dead weight wants a field trip. The radios made new noises. The flattened syllables of men standing on the edge. A squad leader tried to climb from panic to command and slipped. Command, this is Bravo. We are pinned. Casualties mounting. We cannot push. We cannot pull back. We need... The colonel asked for artillery clearance. The answer came late. Wrong for the angles. Smoke was suggested, then dismissed. The wind would weaponize it against their own. The drone shifted views and caught just enough of the gun pit on the spur to make Rachel's palms itch. Dust coughed from the muzzle. The traverse ticked like a metronome. She knew the space between bursts. She knew the gap her bullet needed. She unzipped the rifle case. The sound was small, but a first sergeant near the door still looked up, ready to shut it down. The M40A5 slid free, honest heft of steel and glass. By feel, she checked the bolt, locked a magazine, and shouldered the sling. I can end this, she whispered. She said it not only against the steel, but against the muscle memory of obedience that had kept her quiet for months. Sergeant, the first sergeant barked, defaulting to authority. Where are you going with that? Out, she answered. Before the next word landed, a call sign she knew cut off mid-sentence. Another voice stumbled in, gulping air. 200-meter rule stands. Colonel Hayes repeated as if saying it could conjure cover. No one moved. Men who had laughed now stared at their hands. The ones who had whispered found nothing to say. Officers rearranged procedures. The monitors kept reporting a reality that didn't care whether anyone was comfortable. Rachel slung the rifle. She looked from screen to door and back again. The angles out there were wrong, but not unsolvable. The distances were brutal but not outside the rifle's reach. She pictured the shallow saddle on the near ridge. A firing lane rad through the anchors. 2 shots to break the geometry, a third to keep it broken. No one asked her plan. No one asked anything. The room had decided waiting was safer than choosing. She had been patient. She had been silent. She had written doctrine in notebooks no one read. Now the valley posed the oldest question, and she already knew the answer. She breathed once and for the 3rd time spoke softer, steadier. I can end this. They ignored her. Rachel didn't wait for approval. She walked out of the command center with her rifle across her chest, helmet clipped low, jaw set like iron. No one followed. No one stopped her. The men who had mocked her sat in silence watching the feed, content to let rules write an obituary for 480 Marines. She moved through the compound like a shadow, past Humvees crusted in dust and crates that rear of fuel and sweat. Her boots struck earth with a rhythm steadier than her pulse. In her vest pocket, her father's old dog tag tapped against her chest with each step. The metal was worn thin by his years of service and hers, the letters fading but never forgotten. At the edge of the compound, Rachel Vega checked her load. The suppressed M40A5 slung across her shoulder, spare mags secured tight in their pouches, rangefinder clipped to her gear, and notebook pages folded into a plastic sleeve tucked close to her chest. She carried everything she needed, not for glory, not for protocol, but for geometry and survival. The climb toward the Overwatch Ridge was brutal. Loose shale slid beneath her boots, the slope resisting each step. She kept her body low, moving with the patience of someone who had rehearsed this approach in her head 1,000 times. Dust clung to her face and rocks scraped her sleeve. Still, she pressed on, breathing steady until she reached a ridge crown bent just enough to hide her silhouette. She dropped prone, settled the bipod, and let the world collapse into her scope. Below, chaos was alive and visible. Marines huddled behind burning vehicles, trapped under sheets of fire from every direction. Muzzle flashes stitched the ridges. RPG teams scrambled, hunting for angles. Dust rose in violent clouds where rounds chewed into earth. The battalion was being devoured in slow motion. Rachel pressed her cheek against the stock. Her crosshairs locked on a machine gun nest perched 900 meters out on a rocky spur. The weapon spat fire in steady rhythm, pinning an entire squad to the dirt. She exhaled, the reticle froze. She squeezed. The suppressed crack whispered into the valley. A heartbeat later, the gunner crumpled, the weapon falling silent. For a moment, the valley stilled. Marines lifted their heads in confusion. Then the radios erupted. Who's shooting? Command, do we have air cover? Negative, no cast cleared. Rachel chambered another round, eyes already shifting. Her second target revealed itself. An RPG team, one man holding the launcher, the other feeding a rocket. Barely 70 meters from a pin squad. The tube aimed toward a smoking Humvee. Rachel measured the arc, read the smoke drift, and fired. The gunner dropped before he could launch. The rocket clattered harmlessly into dirt. Marines on the ground shouted through the net, "What the hell? Who the hell's covering us?" She gave no answer. Instead, she crawled forward 3M, shifting her angle, keeping her outline fused with the rock. The enemy reacted quickly. Sniper glints sparked across the opposite ridge, sweeping like searchlights. Rachel pressed flat, heartbeat calm, fingers tracing dirt until its coolness steadied her. Inch by inch, she slid sideways until she reached cover behind scattered stone. She propped the rifle again, scope cutting toward the valley's northern lip. She worked methodically. Each shot wasn't about numbers. It was about cutting threads. A command node collapsed mid-order, leaving his squad scattered. A machine gunner on the western slope jerked back from his tripod. The line of fire broken. A squad leader rallying fighters vanished into dust, his charge sputtering. Every squeeze wasn't subtraction. It was addition. Gaps widened. Silences lengthened. Each trigger pull bought Marines a few more breaths. The kill box began to come apart. On the net, confusion shifted into realization. This isn't air. This is a rifle. Who's got Overwatch? Eyes left. Something's cutting the spurs. Rachel's breathing slowed. Her world narrowed to geometry, distance, wind, time. She swung the scope, calculated holdovers in a blink, and executed without hesitation. Her sleeve snagged on rock as she shifted, sliding up her arm. For the first time in months, the tattoo on her forearm was exposed. The Marine sniper emblem, clear, undeniable, earned. Not decoration, not mistake, identity. Her scars too caught the light. Thin white lines along her knuckles. Burns that had never fully healed. They spoke of a past she never revealed, missions etched into her skin that others had erased from her record for politics' sake. But now those scars shouted louder than any dismissal. "Command, do you see this?" a lieutenant on the ground yelled. "We've got a ghost on overwatch." Then a grizzled voice, rough and unmistakable, cut into the net. Commander Rohr, the SAL commander, moving with the battalion. "Call sign check," he barked. "Who the hell's covering us?" Rachel Vega didn't respond, but someone else did. A comms tech on the operations net with access to her file whispered in shock. "Ghost 206, it's Ghost 206. The net froze, that heavy silence where everyone listens. Commander Rohr's tone shifted, suspicion melting into awe. "Wait, Ghost 206, that's Rachel Vega." A stunned pause followed. Then a Marine's voice came breathless. "No way. Dead weight is Ghost 206. And suddenly the battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath. Because Ghost 206 wasn't a name for mockery. It was a call sign whispered at sniper school, tied to impossible shots and unconfirmed ranges. A legend built before politics shoved her aside. Back in the command room, Colonel Hayes went rigid, staring at the feed, at the flicker of her rifle in the dust. Realization spread over his face like a shadow. The support detail no one wanted was the only thing holding the battalion together. Rachel ignored it all. She kept firing, scope dancing ridge to ridge, opening seams where walls had stood. The kill box unraveled into a corridor, the valley shifting from tomb to escape route. She never raised her voice, never demanded credit. She just pulled the trigger again and again. Every shot answering the doubt that had stalked her for months. And in that moment, every Marine who had laughed, every sergeant who had dismissed her, every officer who had sidelined her watched as Sergeant Rachel Vega, Ghost 206, rewrote the battlefield one round at a time. What had felt like a coffin hours earlier now shook with rotor thunder. Dust spiraled into choking clouds as the first helicopters dropped into the corridor she had carved with her rifle. Marines stumbled and sprinted toward landing zones, some dragging wounded brothers, others covering with their last rounds. Every one of them knew the line between massacre and miracle was a single rifle hidden on the ridge. Rachel stayed prone, cheek against the stock, eyes fixed through glass. Each helicopter arrival brought new targets. Muzzle flashes too close to the LZ, an enemy fighter racing for a last desperate shot, a shadow shifting where none should be. She cut them down with the same cold patience she'd shown on the range. Half-second squeezes, controlled breaths. Then the radio crackled with something new. Hope. First chalk is up. Wounded aboard. Second bird inbound. Corridor holding command. This is Trident Actual. Rohr's voice declared. Ghost 206 has us covered. Repeat. Ghost 206 has us covered. Her call sign raced through the net like current. Voices steadied. Marines who had been gasping now spoke with crisp precision. The fight shifted from survival to extraction. Commander Rohr's tone, firm and measured, cut the chaos. All units report accountability. One by one, squads checked in. At first there were gaps. Silence where names should have been. Then slowly those silences filled with voices. Bravo secured. Charlie accounted for Delta, moving to Bird. When the last squad leader checked in, Commander Rohr exhaled into the net. All 480 accounted for. 0 left behind. The words hit harder than any gunfire. 0 left behind. An outcome no one in the command room had believed possible. When the ambush first tore open, Rachel Vega didn't celebrate. She cycled the bolt, swept the ridges one final time, and tracked each helicopter until the last one lifted into the sky. Only then did she ease the safety on and lift her cheek from the stock. Her hand stayed steady, her face unreadable. The climb down was slower, every step heavy with fatigue she refused to show. By the time she reached the compound's edge, helicopters were already landing, battered Marines spilling out, medics rushing to meet them. Dust coated everything in bone gray, but the air carried something new. Silence. Not the silence of mockery or dismissal, but of respect. Marines lined the path into the compound. No laughter, no smirks, helmets tucked under arms, eyes fixed on her as she walked past. Men who once shifted away from her in the mess hall now stood firm, shoulders squared, acknowledging without words. She felt their stares but didn't return them. Her rifle hung at her side, sling cutting across her chest, boots pressing a quiet trail in the dust. At the far end of the line stood Colonel Hayes. His posture was regulation perfect, jaw locked tight. When she stopped before him, the weight of the compound pressed into the silence between them. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. Rachel stood at attention, rifle resting at her leg. Yes, sir. The paws stretched. Men around them held their breath. Then Hayes's voice softened, cracking under something older than doctrine. You saved a battalion. The words landed like a verdict. For the first time, his eyes actually met hers. Not her name tape, not her file, but her. Before she could respond, Commander Rohr stepped forward. Dust streaked his uniform. Grime clung to his helmet, eyes bloodshot from hours in the fight. He stopped in front of her, raised his hand in a sharp salute, and held it with the kind of weight that turned a gesture into a monument. Ghost 206, he said, voice formal but thick with sincerity. The Valley owes you. Behind him, Marines shifted, helmets came off, some lowered their heads, others whispered. Quiet, reverent. She carried us. Dead weight saved the battalion. No, another answered. Ghost 206 did. The stillness broke into an ovation. Not wild cheering, but the deep resonant sound of men honoring something greater than themselves. Not the wild cheers of celebration, but the deep resonant sound of men acknowledging something greater than themselves. Hands clapped, boots stomped, voices murmured in reverence. Rachel Vega didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply lowered her eyes and said, I was just doing my duty, sir. Colonel Hayes nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if the motion itself admitted how wrong he had been. Commander Rohr dropped his salute and extended a hand. She shook it, her grip steady, her scars visible against his calloused palm. For Rachel, it wasn't vindication. It wasn't even relief. It was accuracy. She had done exactly what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had prepared her for, what her notebooks had whispered in the quiet of long nights. She had seen the geometry and she had solved it. The ovation followed her as she walked toward the armory, the dog tag on her chest, tapped against her vest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. Inside, she set her rifle on the bench and began her ritual, stripping it down, cleaning every piece, logging each shot into her notebook. The numbers mattered, the method mattered. Recognition was noise, but outside those walls something had shifted forever. The Marines who once mocked her would never again call her dead weight. The officers who had dismissed her would never again ignore her hand in a briefing. The silence that once carried jeers was now filled with respect too heavy to be spoken aloud. And for the battalion, the story would live in the only way stories ever survive, retold by those who were there. We should have died in that valley, they would say. But Ghost 206 was watching. True courage, the voice reminds us, doesn't always roar. Often it waits, quiet, steady, unseen, until the world finally needs it. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask for recognition. It simply does its duty, and in doing so changes everything. One sniper, overlooked and doubted, refused to let protocol bury 480 Marines. Her rifle rewrote fate, turning a kill box into a corridor of survival. Sergeant Rachel Vega proved that patience and discipline can alter history when courage refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, honor her sacrifice by saluting in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from tonight. And don't forget, subscribe to Old Bill's Tales so that these stories of duty, valor, and sacrifice are never forgotten. Your voice keeps their legacy alive.